Okay, so chapter 13, we kind of went through this yesterday. I'm putting it on here because I've added a couple of terms to this list that I want you guys to catch up on. I'm not going to go through everything on this again, and then this way it's on the video for folks who need to pause it and double check their list. The Boshin War and the Treaty of Portsmouth are additional for you here. Now, remember I always reserve the right to make you smarter than your book will.
Yeah, I was just...
Okay, so Boshin War, yes, and Treaty of Portsmouth. Yes, you will be tested over these. You will at least be quizzed over them.
Which one was the Boshin War?
I will explain that.
No.
Calm down back there.
She's so eager.
Okay,
Wait. Treaty of
Portsmouth. Portsmouth is what it looks like.
Okay.
So you've seen all of these before? Yes? We went over them yesterday? Okay. Watch the video. Okay, so this is where we stopped yesterday. The gentleman in this picture is Tokugawa Ieyasu. Should remember him from when we last discussed Japan. He is the guy who ended the Warring States period and unified Japan. Remember, this is the time period where the emperor is still at the top of the ranks, but he actually has no power. And the shogun is the one who has the power. The shogun is then served by daimyo, who employ, what's the Japanese form of knights? Samurai, right? Okay, and the merchants are clear at the bottom of all of this because they're just not important. Okay, so we've got the Tokugawa shogunate established in 1603. It's going to be around for more than 250 years. Okay, the Tokugawa shogunate closes Japan, makes it a closed country. Your book tells you that they left one port open, Nagasaki, for trade with the Dutch. The book neglects to tell you that they did also allow limited trade with the Koreans and with the Chinese. Warren is down in the auditorium setting up cameras.
He wants to know, do you want the Moak and the cart down there?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Pat.
You're going on the internet, Patrick.
Okay.
Can you list those two again? China and what?
China and Korea. So Japan wasn't as closed as your book leads you to believe. Oh, doggone it.
Whoa.
Okay. Everything is going well until the Opium War happens. Now, who was the Opium War fought between?
China.
China and Britain. So you're giving me that look like this section's about Japan. Why are you bringing up China? Well, if you're Japan sitting on the outside and watching Britain clobber China and force them to open their doors and grant extraterritorial rights and stuff, what are you thinking?
They're gonna do it to us.
We're next. Uh-oh. This is a little concerning. Thank you.
Gosh dang it.
Thank you, Mari.
This is the other one.
Okay. So, when Japan watches this happen, they start to wonder about their own fate. At this point, the Tokugawa shogunate begins a little bit to try to modernize Japan, thinking and hoping that they can kind of stave off some of this outside foreign influence. Familiar with the phrase too little too late?
Yes.
In 1853, okay, Crimean War's going on in Southwest Asia. We're in the midst of our slavery and states' rights debate here in the United States, and we send Commodore Matthew Perry over with a fleet of American warships. Sails right on into Tokyo Bay, drops anchor, and here go the Japanese out to meet him. Now, the interesting thing here, look at this ship. And what do you see? This is a contemporary Japanese woodblock print. Guy who was there, saw this, painted this. What do you see on this ship? Talk to me about it.
It's big.
It's got sails.
It's got the little things for smoking.
It's got steam engine. What's this?
Stuff.
Paddle wheel. A paddle wheel. So they don't have propellers and that kind of engine, but he's got a steam engine for slow navigation and sails for ocean going. This is an interesting technological hybrid that didn't last for all that long because this paddle wheel is kind of a problem out on the open ocean. Doesn't exactly aid in navigation. So, there you go. So what does Commodore Perry do? He is essentially a mailman. He delivers a letter to the Shogun from President Millard Fillmore. In that letter, President Fillmore is demanding that Japan open its ports to trade and diplomacy. Knock, knock, let us in. Japan does not immediately acquiesce. Perry sticks around, negotiates some more. There's further negotiation that goes on. And in 1854, Japan and the United States signed the Treaty of Kanagawa.
Is that in our book?
It is in your book. The Treaty of Kanagawa opened 2 ports to U.S. ships, but not for trade.
Wait, repeat.
The Treaty of Kanagawa opens 2 ports to U.S. ships, but not for trade. Why? What good is a port if you can't trade?
You can invade, though.
What kind of ship did we just have?
Portion.
How was it partially powered? Steam. What do you need to make steam? Coal. You can't put enough coal on your ship to sail across the Pacific and back. So at least American ships can go into 2 Japanese ports to refuel. Now, what the Treaty of Kanagawa does is it opens the door to future negotiation. And ultimately, additional treaties are signed that do grant trading rights and extraterritorial rights. Remember what a sweet deal those are from China? Yeah, if you're an American citizen in Japan, you are subject to U.S. rules and U.S. courts, not Japanese rules. And then we also negotiated very low taxes on imports. So the stuff that we took over and sold in Japan would be taxed very, very lightly, making it incredibly competitive on Japanese markets. This is a good thing. Now, if you're Japanese, how do you feel about these rights granted in future treaties?
Very good.
Yeah, the Japanese had a word for these. They called them unequal treaties. Because in those treaties, did we grant the Japanese extraterritorial rights in the United States? Nope. Did we grant them low taxes on imports? Absolutely not. So these treaties are definitely unequal. And the Japanese resent that very much. Remember that. Okay. Ultimately, these unequal treaties, Japan's inability to make them not unequal, and why did Japan have to agree to unequal treaties? What? Yeah, they couldn't do anything about it. And why couldn't they do anything about it? Because their army is samurai and pikemen. And dude with a long, sharp stick. And we show up with a steamship loaded with cannon and musketmen. Okay? That's not a good battle to pick. So, within Japan, there becomes this debate about how things should be run. And it results in what is called the Boshin War. So here you go, your explanation of the Boshin War. 1868 and 69. What's just finished in the United States by 1868 and 69?
Civil War.
The Civil War, finished in 1865. So there's a lot of experienced military officers and enlisted men who have all this experience, and unless they want to go fight the Indian Wars on the frontier, they have nothing to do. And so a war arises in Japan between the believers of the shogunate and the folks who want to restore full power to the emperor, the imperial powers. And guess who they enlist to help them fight this war? Former U.S. and Confederate officers, British officers, French officers, they're all over there. How many of you have seen The Last Samurai? Tom Cruise? No? Okay, you're too young. All right. Well, if you ever do see The Last Samurai, it's partly about this Boshin War, and then it's partly about a series of wars that come on later. But it is about this dichotomy that the imperial forces modernize very quickly. They buy their arms and their weapons from the Europeans. They get the Americans and the Europeans to come and train them, teach them how to fight in this new style. And so here you have a row of musketmen lining up with their artillery barrage, and you have pikemen and samurai coming into this firing of muskets. And it's not exactly a fair fight. Because if I am a samurai, in order to strike you down, I have to at least be this close, right? Do I have to be nearly this close to shoot you dead with a musket?
No.
Can my sword really defend me from your musket?
Only if you're really
Woo,
good.
woo, woo, woo. Yeah, I'm not a ninja. I'm just a samurai. Okay?
Art ninja.
And so, there is a lack of balance even in the Boshin War. Now, it's not all one-sided. The Tokugawa forces win multiple battles. But the imperial forces got some navy together. So did the Tokugawa. Ultimately, the Tokugawa folks are driven out of main island Japan to another more remote island. They set up their own little empire. Ultimately, in a couple of years, they're forced to capitulate. And we have the end of the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan and the creation of...
What side enlisted the U.S. people?
the imperial forces, the modernizing forces. Okay. We have the Meiji Restoration. Okay. The Meiji Dynasty. So the emperor who comes to power now at the end of the Tokugawa shogunate is Meiji. And they start on a series of reforms. Okay? They announce to the Japan and the world that they are going to study the West and pick the best to replicate in their own system. So they send samurai out, because the samurai are out of a job now. You can't be a samurai in Japan. It ends up being illegal. Eventually they outlaw your ability to even carry swords. Okay? So they send them out around the world to study abroad, to examine military and governmental structures. They pick from Germany, Germany's government structure, where they have an autocratic, all-powerful emperor, but there's also a legislature. They pick Germany's navy. They pick Britain's military, their army, to structure themselves on. And they go back, and they do it. In 1889, the Meiji issue the first Japanese constitution. And in it, the emperor has absolute power, but there is a legislature. What do we call it in Japan?
Diet.
The Diet. Very good. Very good. Okay, one house is elected from the people, the other one is appointed by the emperor. They essentially have no power. They're kind of advisory bodies to this all-powerful emperor. Okay? There are separate sub-departments for specialties. Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, all of that kind of stuff, sort of like we have. Okay? In the military, there are no more samurai, and all men in Japan can be called on to serve. It's modeled on the British Army, the German Navy. For reform of their industry, of which Japan has very, very little when the Meiji take power, They're looking to the U.S. They want U.S.-style factories and industry. They want Western infrastructure. In order to have a modern economy, you need to have, remember all the stuff we talked about that sprung up in Great Britain? Communication. So a good postal system, telegraph. Eventually they're going to need an electrical system. Got to have railroads and modern ports. Cranes, ports deep enough for big shipping ships. Okay? Yes?
What was that constitution? Was it just a name?
The Meiji Constitution. In Britain, when factories were built, they were built by entrepreneurs. In Japan, because Japan wants to industrialize virtually overnight. Okay? And in the great span of history, Japan industrializes in the blink of an eye. And the way they do it is this. They don't wait for entrepreneurs to have the idea and try and raise the financial capital and build their factory. Japan says, no, we like the way that Ford does it there, or we like the way that Singer does it there. Ford wasn't around, by the way, by this time. And they say, boom, the government will build the factory. Voila, abracadabra, clunk, there's the factory. Now, the wealthy can come and buy the factory, operate it, and help to fuel the further growth of industry. It happens a whole lot faster that way.
Why didn't we think of that?
We didn't need to think of that. We weren't in a hurry to industrialize. It happened naturally here. If you want something on a grand scale done relatively efficiently, the government has to do it. Who builds the interstate? The government. Because who would bother to try and get investors? I'm going to build 3 lanes of road from here to nowhere and let people use it for free. Right? Doesn't happen. Sometimes, in order to get stuff done, you need the government to do it. Come take econ from me next year or senior year, and we'll talk all about public goods and how that stuff works.
See you next year.
All right. Then there are also reforms within society. In Japan, under the Tokugawa shogunate and before, classes, social classes were legally defined. And you were pretty much born into your class and died in that class. And those classes were also very built into the primary religion in Japan, which was... I feel like Dora the Explorer here. I'll ask a question and stare into space and eventually answer it myself. Confucianism! Thank you. Yes. Confucianism. And Confucianism relied very heavily on these rigid social classes. The Meiji Constitution outlaws them. There are now no legal social classes. Does that mean that the social classes go away? Not at all. But at least now they can't be enforced by law. You can advance in society. That had not always been the case. All right. Anytime you change things, conflict can arise. Internally, there's more war as the samurai are forced out and eliminated from society. And now that Japan has industrialized overnight, they're going to get into some conflict outside of their borders. Remember all those things that it takes to industrialize, all the ingredients for industrialization? What's at the top of the list?
People.
Resources and people. Does Japan lack people? No. But what do they lack? Remember Volcanic Island, right? Not a lot to use there. So Japan is going to look to become an imperial power herself. Because if there are no resources at home, where do you get them?
Your neighbor.
You guys go to Walmart, right? In the days before 24-hour stores, if you were baking, Mr. Boyd, and you were missing an ingredient, you can't run to the store, it's Easter Sunday, what do?
See somebody that's got that stuff.
Right, you knock on your neighbor's door.
I still do that.
Well, Japan's going to go knocking on their neighbor's door. But they don't walk over with, hey, hey, I'll bring you a loaf of bread when I'm done. Can you loan me a couple tablespoons of salt? They show up and it's more, gimme. First war is the Sino-Japanese War, and this is a war fought with China, but not about China. Not fought about China. In Asia, you've got Japan, you've got China. And hanging off of China is Korea. The Korean Peninsula just kind of dangles out there in the East China Sea. What?
We haven't gotten
I know, and I need to get it to you, especially with this Malaysian Airlines thing, so you guys know where all these places they're talking about are.
I don't even know what's
We're gonna kick Asia off on Monday. I'm moving it up because of that. Yep.
Sorry, guys.
No, it's necessary. I'd already made that decision.
Oh. Dang it, Oak.
No, it's turned in to be copied.
So 14.1 notes are due Tuesday then?
No, I'm handing it out to you on Monday. We won't go over it until Tuesday.
Oh.
Yeah,
So they
after
are
your
due
quiz. Because it'll take us 2 days to go through over Asia anyway. It's just that big.
Yay.
Yeah. So, Korea had long been a vassal state of China. Remember vassal state? No. What's a vassal?
Don't they have to like
A servant. Servant. So Korea was independently governed and stuff, but basically they did whatever China wanted. Okay? Well, Japan has been trading with Korea, and China goes, no, I don't think you should trade with Japan anymore, Korea. And Korea's like, but we like trading with Japan. And China's like, no, I don't think you should trade with Japan anymore. Well, Korea understood that tone of voice, and so they quit trading with Japan. And Japan's like, yo, Korea, what happened? I thought we were straight, bud. I don't, you're not returning my calls anymore? I don't understand. And you know, Korea's totally screening those calls. They won't answer the phone. Like, change the number, block this incoming caller. They unfriend them. It's kind of ugly. Ultimately, what happens, the way this happens is a civil war erupts in Korea. And Korea's like, oh no, save our Korean emperor. And China's like, yeah, save your Korean emperor, but we're not helping, because we'd rather that you just decay into turmoil so then we can just come in and take you over entirely. And so Korea's like, refriend, yo, Japan, help a brother out. And so Japan goes over at Korea's invitation. At Korea's invitation, they go over to help. Are you with me so far? China drives by Korea's house, sees Japan's car parked in the driveway, and is like, oh no,
It happened.
no you didn't. This is not happening in our vassal state.
This is like a love triangle.
It is very much so. And so, here are Japan and China in Korea's house. Hey, knock it off. No. They called us and invited. No, you're not talking to our vassals. I'm not talking to your vassals. They called me. They asked for help. There was a burglar in the house. And China's like, no, it is not happening that way. No. And so China and Japan totally fight it out all over Korea. Stomping on the farmland, burning down the cities. It's chaos. It's devastation. And then they sign a treaty, and China goes home, and Japan goes home. And guess who's left destroyed by the Sino-Japanese War?
Korea.
There you go. Thank you. You can move back home and try and resurrect your homeland. So, remember, folks, the Sino-Japanese War fails to mention the real victims, the folks caught in the middle where all the fighting went on. Korea is devastated by the Sino-Japanese War, and they don't really ever recover. By the time we are fighting the Korean War, 100 years later, well, 60, 70 years later, They are still farming with wooden plows and oxen and using two-wheeled carts pulled by those oxen. They never catch up. So Japan came out pretty favorably out of the Sino-Japanese War. And they're like, oh yeah, we got big boy britches on now. Let's take on a real enemy.
Where did Sino come from?
It's an Asian language thing. So they're like, there's some good mineral wealth up there in Siberia. Russians aren't using it, so we're just going to go take it. The Russians have a significant fleet in the Northwest Pacific. The Japanese sail their fleet up there. Boom! The Russian fleet wets its pants, sinks, and the Japanese have got the upper hand. The Japanese invade. They actually invade south into Manchuria and get a foothold in Manchuria, which is in China, during the Russo-Japanese War. And then they keep fighting, and they keep fighting, and they keep fighting. Come here. Come be Russia for me.
Mirror.
Okay? I don't know if you've ever watched a boxing match,
Oh, gosh.
but by the 10th round, what are those boxers doing? They're like,
As Warren
isn't that what those boxing matches look like? They're just standing there hugging each other and tapping each other, right? This is the point that Russia and Japan fight at. Neither one of them has enough power to deliver that knockout punch, right? They're just kind of standing there hugging and sweating on each other.
That's like third round. of
So
wrestling.
here's how they solved the Russo-Japanese War.
You walked in at a bad time. You just.
They solved the Russo-Japanese War by calling in a mediator. They call in Teddy Roosevelt to negotiate this treaty. Teddy Roosevelt says, "Oh, I got a country to govern here. I'm the President of the United States. I'm not coming over there. You send your people over here." So they sail to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Where did I put my clicker? They sail to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They are jet-lagged, as it were, for 1900, right? They're ship-lagged. They are in a strange place, eating strange food, sleeping in a lumpy bed. Roosevelt's very shrewd here. If they got to stay home in familiar surroundings, their family around them, are they in a hurry to negotiate a treaty? No. Make them go far away from home and eat strange food, make them uncomfortable, they gotta wear funny Western clothes. Treaty of Portsmouth negotiated in no time. Roosevelt will win the Nobel Prize for that. Okay. In the rest of Southeast Asia, we're going to talk about French Indochina and King Mongkut of Siam. Here's where we're jumping into section 2. Okay. How do you avoid, what the heck? How do you avoid conflict? Something's wrong here. I went backwards.
Did it.
There, I went backwards. Okay, things to know. How did the Europeans go about colonizing Southeast Asia? You're going to see the same pattern here. How did Siam specifically avoid colonial rule? Perfect. I also have to get this cooking to export for the afternoon, but
Oh, I
We're good.
totally thought you said cocaine.
cooking. Wow.
Okay,
All right.
cocaine every time.
So, what we learn in Southeast Asia, anybody in here ever watch Star Trek? No? The Borg? The Borg are an alien race in Star Trek, and their phrase is resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. You can't beat the Borg. If they run into you, they're going to take you over. Well, what the Southeast Asians find out is that resistance is sometimes futile when it comes to European imperialism. Start in Vietnam. The Vietnamese people are sitting on a whole lot of delicious resources for the Europeans. Rubber in particular. Why is rubber of such interest to the Europeans?
Tires.
Tires, because we have now entered The age of the automobile. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Yeah. The Vietnamese also are able to grow a lot of food. And they're going to be able to provide some other stuff to Europe that isn't readily available in Europe. And as Britain taught us, the best way to improve your industry and enrich your nation is through mercantilism, right? Mercantilism, where you go out and you get the colonies, take the raw materials from them, make them buy the finished goods, right? Huge premium. So the French go in to Vietnam and they're like, hey, I know we just met, but we're taking over your country. Now, it's not call me maybe. It's we're taking over your country. And the Vietnamese are like, what? No, we're totally fighting you. We'll meet you after school by the flagpole. And the French are like, no, we're fighting now. Vietnam's like, but we're not ready. We haven't modernized or anything, and this isn't going to be fair. And France says we didn't intend for it to be fair, and the Vietnamese get clobbered. And what you know today as Vietnam becomes French Indochina. The French colonize it. The French utilize a system of governing in their colonies called paternalism. Pater is Latin for father. So the French treat their colonial subjects as though they are little children. They're there now. We're going to make it all better for you. Stop doing your math.
Yeah. Stop doing it. Come on. Get your life
Now,
together.
now you have to go home and watch the lecture on the blog.
That sucks.
That was your plan all. No, you can't finish your math. Wow.
No.
Rarely.
Folks are aggravated today. She just wanted to flip.
She's
No,
actually,
that was all for show, and you will never forget the Sino-Japanese War and what it did to
No.
Korea.
That woke me up.
she's actually I watched it over.
All right. So if I were really mad,
That's
the desk
actually
would end up back there.
Well, I mean, are you
You had some trouble lifting the desk.
Hulk smash.
We need to get you the Hulk shirt where you like pull it up and it's a Hulk face underneath.
Where,
And
where,
then the
Yeah,
Caleb
throw
Dunbar
another
has
shirt.
it.
you have to
Yeah,
have
like-
another shirt.
yeah, like-
The Hulk fists that make smashing noises when you punch.
But then
But
you
they're
get
fun.
Hulk shirt
Okay.
and Hulk face.
Anyway, back to Vietnam. What the French do is they force the Vietnamese to begin planting cash crops. Cash crops. Remember what that did when the British did it to India? What's it lead to when you make people start planting cash crops? Money for you. What's it lead to for the people in the country?
less food.
Starvation. You know, you can only grow one thing on this plot of land, and if I'm growing cash crops, then I'm not growing what I used to eat, and now I'm hungry. And as the Vietnamese begin to die off, the French import laborers. They import folks from elsewhere in Asia, including from China.
Hey, why not?
So, because China's undergoing that population boom, and they've got food shortages too, so they're perfectly willing to leave. The French don't tell them they're going to be just as hungry in their new house, but, you know, whatever. It's furnished. It's a furnished hut in the jungle.
Sometimes you just gotta-
You got to do what you got to do. All right, so Vietnam becomes French Indochina. Now let's look at where resistance wasn't futile. In Siam, there's a ruler there by the name of Mongkut. King Mongkut is pretty shrewd. He has been studying the West. He's a very smart guy. He doesn't quite get the West. And to illustrate how much he doesn't get the West, when he reads in the papers about our Civil War, feels very bad for President Lincoln trying to hold his nation together. And so he sends to President Lincoln several elephants to aid him in defeating the rebels in his country. Now,
That's so nice.
for the king of Siam, this is a huge thing. The elephant is the most powerful weapon he has in his military, and he is absolutely convinced that the arrival of these elephants, if President Lincoln will use them in his army, war over, problem solved. He thinks he's studying. He's not fond of the idea of slavery, although he has slaves in his own palace.
Well, of course.
But, you know, when you read it in a book, it's one thing. When you live it, it's another. So when the British in particular come to Siam and they're trying to get their imperial tentacles in there, negotiate some extraterritorial rights and that kind of stuff, Mongkut doesn't take the Vietnamese approach and go, yo yeah, not gonna do it. He manipulates them. He's talking to the British over here. He's talking to the French over here. He plays them off of one another. Oh, really? You'll give us those benefits? Well, the French said that they would. And then he goes and he talks to the French and says, well, the British promised. And so he just keeps playing them and playing them and playing them and granting them small little insignificant rights. And he keeps his country free of European imperial influence by doing that. Now, we've only heard about 2 other places that resisted European influence. They were in Africa. They were Ethiopia and Liberia. And now add to that list Siam. As you want to talk about an exclusive club, the whole list of 3 nations that resist European imperial influences in world history, that's pretty significant. Pretty significant. There's no extraterritorial rights. There's no unequal treaties going on. There's no military incursions into Siam. And his son carries on. Now, when I hand out the Asia map on Monday and you start looking at those nations, you're not going to find Siam. And you're going to say, well, Hoke, you're a liar. They lost. I am not. They changed their name. Anybody know what Siam is today? Thailand. There you go. Now, go back in time enough to an old Disney film called Lady and the Tramp. Lady and the Tramp. There's a couple of nasty little kitty cats in that movie. And their song is,
If you please.
that cat comes from Siam, and that's why it's called a Siamese cat. If it weren't a Siamese cat, it would be a Siamese cat? I don't know if they'd already changed their name. So, there you go. Section 1 and that little bit of Section 2 in a nutshell. Yes, ma'am. Nah. We're done. Yes, we are done.
Good time.
Nope. Finny.